Good evening, everyone. My name is Petra Duchner, and I'm the Manager of Mental Health and Critical Services here at the OCDSB. It's my pleasure to welcome you this evening to Sir Robert Gordon High School and this evening's parent session. With the legislation of cannabis coming up sometime this summer or fall, we've heard that there's been increased talk, questions, and worry in our community about cannabis use, particularly with youth. Tonight's event is a collaboration of community partners who, through Project STEP, are able to provide support, treatment, education, and prevention in all of our high schools in the Ottawa region. The goal of this evening's session is to hear from experts in the community to tackle common myths about cannabis, what is known about the upcoming new laws, how to have that talk, and how to support our youth. Presenting tonight is Christina Semenchuk and Christina Walker, public health nurses from Ottawa Public Health, Constable Paul McCormack, School Resource Officer from Ottawa Police Service, and Dr. Elizabeth Paquette, Chief Psychologist and Mental Health Lead from the Ottawa Catholic School Board. Following the presentation, we will invite you to the foyer where community partners are available to answer your questions on any questions that you might have on this very important topic. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christina.
Okay, so I am the first of the two Christinas presenting tonight. I want to thank everyone for coming out and also thank those who may be watching from home. I hope you find the information helpful and informative. If any information tonight triggers any strong emotions, please reach out to any of the community partners here for support. Tonight we will be covering health effects. We are going to review some basic information about cannabis, including health risks. We will also review what we currently know about the new cannabis laws and discuss what legal access to cannabis might look like. Please keep in mind this is an ongoing process. And lastly, we will review available resources as well as tips on talking to your teen about cannabis. We have looked at data from the 2017 Ontario Student Drug Use and Health Survey conducted by the Centre of Addiction and Mental Health. We have specifically looked at a sample of Ottawa students in grades 7 to 12. One common myth is that youth have a perception that everyone uses cannabis, but in fact, the majority of youth do not use. Almost 1 in 5 Ottawa students, or about 18%, reported they used cannabis in the last year. This is similar to the rest of Ontario and not significantly changed since 2009. The percentage of students reporting past year cannabis use increases by grade to more than 1 in 3, or about 36% of students in grade 11 and 12 reporting cannabis use. And among the students who have ever used cannabis, about 50% say they first tried it in grade 9 or 10. Over 1/3 of Ottawa students think cannabis would be fairly easy or very easy to get if they wanted to. Almost half of grade 7 to 12 students who used cannabis in the past year reported that it was either given to them or shared with them by a friend, sibling, or parent. And when legalized, about 13% of grade 9 to 12 students in Ottawa reported that they would try cannabis. So let's just talk a little bit about what cannabis is. It is a psychoactive drug that comes from the cannabis plant. It affects the brain to create a high or euphoric feeling. You may be more familiar with other terms like marijuana, pot, weed, or hash, which are all products made from the cannabis plant. Another myth is that youth think cannabis is not harmful because it's natural. It's just a plant. However, just because something is natural does not mean it's not harmful. Think about poison ivy, heroin made from the opium poppy seeds, tobacco, and alcohol made from fermented plant and fruit materials. Cannabis contains chemicals called cannabinoids, and the two main cannabinoids are THC and CBD. THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol, is a psychoactive chemical that acts on your brain to create the high feeling. It may make someone feel happy, relaxed, talkative, or calm, but it can also cause unpleasant effects such as hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, or anxiety. CBD, or cannabidiol, is a non-psychoactive chemical, and there is evidence that CBD can actually block or lower the effect of THC when the level of CBD is either equal to or more than the level of THC in the cannabis product. CBD is the chemical that is currently being studied for its possible therapeutic use. So how is it consumed? It can be smoked, where the product is burned and then inhaled. It can be vaped, where the product is heated but not burned using an electronic device like an e-cigarette. It then produces a vapor, which is inhaled. Or it can be ingested, where the product is eaten in baked goods, candies or capsules, or consumed in drinks. Cannabis can come in many different forms, such as a dried plant material, which can be smoked or ingested, or processed products like oils and waxes that can be either smoked, vaped, or ingested. And each product can come with a different level of THC and CBD. Be aware of synthetic cannabinoids. Synthetic or man-made cannabinoids are supposed to mimic the effects of cannabis. They have been marketed as legal herbal alternatives with slang names such as K2 or Spice. These can be sold in cannabis head shops, specialty tobacco stores, or online. However, synthetic cannabinoids are illegal and unregulated and have been associated with more severe psychoactive effects and health risks, including reported cases of death. Our message is not to use synthetic cannabinoids. We'll now review some general effects of cannabis use. These are specifically related to a person's health as well as any potential harms. Beginning with short-term effects, we know that cannabis affects mood, affects perception, behavior, and alertness. It can make people feel happy, relaxed, or talkative, but it can also have the unpleasant effects like hallucinations, delusions, or feelings of paranoia and anxiety. It impairs attention, judgment, and response time, which can really impact school performance, sports, work, as well as the ability to drive safely. And these, in turn, can increase the risk for immediate harm and injury. The long-term effects can include an increased risk for addiction, difficulty with memory and concentration, and poor lung health related to smoking. It's important to note that the knowledge of health effects and long-term consequences for some of the newer cannabis products, for example, edibles, as well as vaping, is still emerging. For any women who are planning to become pregnant or currently pregnant or breastfeeding, we know that THC crosses the placenta and passes through breast milk. Any use during pregnancy may cause low birth weight and may affect a baby's growth and development over time. It is safest and best to avoid using cannabis as well as tobacco, alcohol, or other drugs while pregnant or breastfeeding. There are several factors that increase the chances of experiencing negative effects from cannabis use. These may include if someone starts using cannabis at a young age, which is why it is so important that we target youth and young adults. If someone uses cannabis frequently or often, for example, daily or near daily, or if someone uses products that have a higher THC level. If you want to know more about some of these products, please come see us afterwards. Youth are especially susceptible to the long-term effects of cannabis use because their brains are still growing and developing. Brain development continues until around the age of 25. When cannabis is used frequently and at an early age, it has been shown to cause changes in the brain structure and function. And this may permanently affect memory, concentration, intelligence, and the ability to think and make decisions. There is also an increased risk of developing mental illnesses, such as psychosis or schizophrenia, particularly for youth who may have a personal or family history of psychosis or schizophrenia, if youth start using at a young age, or if they use cannabis frequently, meaning daily or near daily. Another myth is that youth don't think cannabis is addictive. However, it is addictive, particularly among frequent and heavy users. Youth are more at risk of addiction to cannabis than adults because of the impact during the brain development. Again, cannabis use can lead to addiction. Both psychological and physical dependence can develop, resulting in feelings of withdrawal when not using or trying to reduce use. About 5 to 9% of users will become dependent, and this jumps up to 17% if use begins as a teen. The best advice is to abstain from cannabis until at least the age of 25 or as long as possible. The health effects I previously mentioned are possible no matter how the cannabis is consumed. The most common ways to consume cannabis are smoking, vaping, or ingesting, for example, eating or drinking it. And these all have differing effects and risks. When cannabis is smoked or vaped, the THC is immediately absorbed into the bloodstream through the lungs. The high is usually felt within minutes and can last up to 6 or more hours. Cannabis smoke contains many of the same harmful chemicals as tobacco smoke, such as tar, carcinogens, and other chemicals. Frequent cannabis smoking can also cause chronic bronchitis, where a person has a cough that doesn't go away, increased mucus production, and wheezing. These symptoms can improve if a person stops smoking cannabis. In addition, the person can also get more lung infections like pneumonia. The effects from smoking cannabis can be worse if users take deep breaths and hold their breath before exhaling. These are common practices among people who smoke cannabis. This increases the amount of time, the amount of toxic material that is absorbed into the lungs. Some of the harmful effects on the lungs from smoking can be reduced through vaping, using a vaporizer or vape device. This heats up the cannabis to release the active chemicals, THC or CBD, but does not burn the plant material. Vaping produces aerosols that contain airborne particles and potentially toxic substances. The long-term effects of vaping are not fully known, including the impact of secondhand exposure to vapors and aerosols. When cannabis is ingested, for example, eaten in food or swallowed in a capsule, the THC has to travel through the digestive tract and pass through the liver before it is absorbed into the blood to reach the brain. This means it takes longer to feel the high when compared to smoking. The onset is usually between 30 minutes to 2 hours and can last up to 12 or more hours. This delayed onset can lead to someone ingesting more since they did not feel the effects the first time. A person may then experience a more severe impairment and psychological effects. Additionally, the specific way the THC is broken down by the liver and then absorbed in the body contributes to a more severe impairment. It's important to note that the delayed onset and the longer the time a person is impaired increases the risk for injuries and accidents. Lastly, the long-term effects of ingesting cannabis, for example, any potential internal effects on the stomach or the liver, are also unknown at this time. I'll now pass it on to my colleague, Christina, to continue. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to review the new cannabis laws, what we currently know. It's important to note that especially the federal legislation is still not final. So this is what we currently know as of today. So the government has promised to legalize cannabis sometime this year. It's expected to happen either late summer, early fall. And their main goal in legalizing cannabis is, what they've said, is to protect young people from accessing and using cannabis, but also to decrease the criminal activity with the black market. What we know is legalization alone is not going to reduce any health effects or harms from cannabis use, but it does create the opportunity to create and regulate rules that will mitigate those risks. So in terms of the federal government, the aspects that fall under their mandate is to make sure we have a safe production and supply. So they say what products will be legally available for sale. To start, it's only going to be fresh or dry cannabis, cannabis oils, or plants and seeds for home growing. Any commercially produced edibles like baked goods or infused beverages will not be allowed for sale immediately, but they have promised to introduce them within the next year. And people can make their own edibles at home using the products that will be legally available. Other areas that are under federal control is they put rules in place for advertising, packaging, and criminal sanctions for impaired driving. And then on the provincial side, the provinces and territories are responsible for putting in a system for retail sale. They can raise the minimum legal age from the federal minimum. They have controls in place for public consumption and impaired driving. What this means is between each province and territory, there could be different sets of rules. And we'll see when I go through Ontario's rules how we might differ from our close neighbor, Quebec. So what we know currently about the Ontario cannabis laws is that the legal minimum age in Ontario will be 19 years of age to purchase, possess, use, or grow cannabis. When in public, there is a federal limit on how much cannabis you can have in your possession at any single time. And right now that is 30 grams of dried cannabis. And when you're growing plants at home, you can only have up to 4 plants per household. In Ontario, they have put in place a prohibition or a rule that if you're under the age of 19, you're not allowed to have any amount of cannabis on you in public. Right now, what we currently don't know about these laws is how they're going to be implemented, when they're going to be implemented, and also the enforcement piece. But what the government has said is they don't want criminal sanctions for youth, especially for small possession. So they said that if a youth is found in possession of cannabis, that an officer can confiscate and recommend a prevention and education program for youth. But the exact details of how that's going to look like and how that's going to work is still unknown. There are also going to be rules about any adult giving cannabis to youth. It's against the law if you supply anybody who's under the age of 19, even if it's your child, if it's your sibling, your cousin. What the rules are really trying to do is prevent youth from getting access to it. So there's going to be laws in place about supplying to underage youth. In terms of where you're going to be able to purchase it, Ontario has gone with a government-controlled system, kind of like the LCBO. So there'll be Ontario cannabis stores set up across the province. We know that they're going to start with 40 stores to begin with this year, and Ottawa has been selected as a city to receive a store. And again, we don't know where that store will be and when we'll see it. In terms of public consumption of recreational cannabis or non-medical cannabis, it's restricted to your private residence. So that means your property in your private home. So along the same lines as how alcohol is regulated, you can't just drink alcohol on the street. You have to be in a home or a licensed place. There is a provision where medical users will be allowed to use where cannabis can be used. And Ontario has aligned their impaired driving laws for alcohol with that of cannabis. So any young drivers, so drivers who have their G1, G2, or M1, M2, or if they're under the age of 21, they'll have to have a 0 level of cannabis in their system when they're driving. Now in terms of the differences between Ontario and Quebec, just like with alcohol, Quebec will have a lower minimum age. They have chosen to go with the minimum age of 18, which is the federal minimum. As well as their public consumption law, they have said that cannabis can be used, whether it's medical or non-medical, wherever tobacco can be used. So in terms of what we're trying to do with public health in our role in preventing substances or addressing substance use in Ottawa, we recognize that substance use can happen across a continuum, from people who choose not to use, who may be using but it's not non-problematic use, to chronic dependence and complex cases of addiction. So we have services and programs in place to support people where they're at in this spectrum. So in terms of our health promotion, we do a lot of education and awareness to try to prevent people from starting to use, especially youth. And we work with our school and community partners in providing this service. So we have school health nurses, like Christina Simichek, who work in all of the elementary and high schools in Ottawa, providing curriculum support to teachers and providing education and resources on substance use. We also have a Parenting in Ottawa strategy in which we provide parenting advice to parents of children 0 to 18. And we're also a member of the Substance Abuse in Youth in Schools and Community Coalition, and this coalition provides substance use prevention and treatment programs, including access to addiction counselors right in your school. And that's for all of the Ottawa high schools. And new this year, because we're trying to prepare our community for the pending legalization of cannabis. We'll be outreaching to youth-serving agencies to give them a similar presentation to increase their awareness and knowledge of cannabis so that they feel more confident in being able to discuss this topic with youth. For those who choose to use, we do have harm reduction strategies. So we want users to reduce their risk, but also the risk to others. And we do have lower risk cannabis use guidelines that we'll talk about in a few slides. We also want to protect the overall health of the population, and that has to do with the public exposure to any secondhand effects from cannabis use. So we do that by supporting smoke-free places and policies. Another key role for public health is to do with surveillance. And what that means is we keep track of data using either population surveys or surveys with youth, like you heard Christina talk about. And that just gives us an idea of who's using, how often they're using, who are the populations that are at risk, including what are the outcomes from it. How many hospitalizations are we seeing? How many impaired driving collisions are we seeing? And we report on these statistics quite regularly. So in terms of your role as a parent, the best thing a parent can do is to talk to your teen. We start talking to our children right from infancy, even while we're pregnant, we talk to our children, which builds attachment. It helps with the developing literacy and language skills. And as they get older, we keep talking to them to teach them and to stay connected. And so as mentioned earlier, youth who use cannabis started using as early as grade 9 and 10. So it's important to start the conversation about drugs early, be open, and talk often. Unfortunately, I can't give you a magic script of exactly what to say and when to say it. So talking about cannabis with your teen might make you nervous and anxious. So take the time and get yourself prepared. So you're here tonight, which is the first step. And remember that you know your child best. So what works for one person may not work for the next, and that's okay. So there are some tips for having a conversation. Like one of the main ones is listen. So start it off by having just an inquisitive conversation. Be open to what they tell you. Try not to be judgmental or try to lecture. And most importantly, don't freak out. Stay calm, especially if you may find out that your child may have tried cannabis. So there's no perfect way to have the conversation, but there are a few resources out there to help you. I think most of you, I saw a lot of you have the Cannabis Talk Kit out there. It gives you some basic information, some tips on having that conversation. It even gives some scenarios of what your youth might say and what you might want to say back. So it's a really good resource. We do have a few copies on hand, but it's available on our website to download. If you go to parentinginottawa.ca/cannabis, you'll see a button where you can download the Cannabis Talk Kit. So your main goal in talking to your youth is to try to prevent them from using. You want to be able to have that conversation early so that you intervene before they even try it. And if they are starting to maybe think about it, maybe they heard it from their friends or they've seen it around, you want to try to help them make a better choice in delaying their use as long as possible. There are other parenting strategies like being engaged, being a role model, setting expectations that can be protective in preventing substance use among teens. It's easier to start these strategies early, and your child will be more receptive to them. And you can all find this information on our Parenting in Ottawa webpage. So it is a reality that as parents, we have the choice to use substances, and once cannabis is legal, some parents may want to use it, just like some people like to enjoy a glass of wine or a beer. And if you choose to do so, there are some things that you should consider if you're going to use. The first point is that you are a role model and your behaviors do influence your youth. You're a bigger influence than you may think. And if Cannabis Talk Kit actually addresses this. There's a section at the back that does some self-reflection on your own substance use, because be prepared that if your youth knows that you use, they're going to bring it up when you try talking to them about it. As mentioned by Christina, the cannabis smoke does contain the same cancer-causing chemicals as tobacco smoke, so it's best to avoid using it, smoking or vaping in your house to prevent your family from being exposed to the secondhand smoke and vapor. And as mentioned, cannabis does impair your attention, your judgment, your reaction time, which needs to be considered if you're responsible for children. Accidents and emergencies can happen anytime. And it's always good to ensure that there's a sober adult who is responsible or who can be responsible for the care of children. And in terms of having it in your home, underage youth do report that they do get their drugs, like alcohol and prescription drugs, from home. So if you're planning on having it in your home, make sure it's up out of reach from young children in a safe, secure space. And then it's good to be aware of the lower risk cannabis use guidelines and to follow them. So that is what I'm going to talk about now. So the key note for the lower risk cannabis use guidelines is that it doesn't mean there's no risk. So any amount of cannabis you decide to use, there's going to come with risks. And the best way to avoid all risks is kind of common sense, is to not use. So to know that if you're going to use, there are risks. And these are some ways that you can minimize them. One is, with the most harmful effects happening with youth, is to delay use as long as possible and to limit your use. So limit to once a week, to special occasions, not using it daily or near daily. Definitely don't smoke it because of the damage it can do to your lungs. There's an opportunity to use lower risk products that are lower in THC or have a higher ratio to CBD or vaping to avoid the effects on your lungs. And there's situations, of course, just like with alcohol, that you wouldn't want to use cannabis, and that would be if you're using alcohol, so don't mix the two substances together. Don't smoke it with tobacco. Don't use it when you're planning to drive. Don't use it if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. And definitely if you're at risk for any mental health problems, cannabis use should be avoided. So where can you go for more information? So Ottawa Public Health has 3 places to get information on cannabis. One is our general Ottawa Public Health website. If you want parenting specific information, there's Parenting in Ottawa. And then if you want to send your youth somewhere for credible information that's put out by Public Health, we have the linkottawa.ca. So that's information that's geared towards youth. And tonight we have some fabulous community partners here with us who also provide many services and supports related to substance use. Their contacts is here, but you feel free to come speak to them when we have our marketplace available. Thank you. I'll pass it on to Paul.
Thanks, Christina, and thank you to all the parents here in the audience and tuning in on Facebook Live for taking the time out of your night to make this a priority. My name is Constable McCormick. I'm a school resource officer in Ottawa. Specifically, I work in Canada in the West End. So I've got 20 schools myself, and my colleagues have about the same amount of schools. Our job is essentially to support the schools and support you as parents as well. We deal with youth on a daily basis. And as Christina mentioned, if your son or daughter ever mentioned to you, or maybe you found that they're into something, chances are we've already dealt with it with other youth. Every set of circumstances is a bit different, but be reassured that we're very comfortable dealing with this. We're here to support you. We're here to support the schools, and we're here to support your youth as well. Tonight I'm not going to get into too much about legislation in the Parliament because it is still before the Senate. It still needs to pass royal ascension, and so I can't speak with any certainty to that. But one thing I can speak with certainty to is how we are dealing with things now and how that won't change in the future. Okay, so currently we have the Youth Criminal Justice Act, which governs youth between the ages of 12 to 18, okay? So whenever we're in a school, and I'll use the example, youth is under the influence of alcohol, we'll look at the Youth Criminal Justice Act to decide what should we do. We've got three options. We can choose to warn them, we can choose to send them to a program called diversion, or we can choose to charge them. It's really up to our discretion. And what we're going to look at is the frequency. We're going to look at the reasons why. We're going to look to see what community partners are already involved. And as it says in our name, school resource officer, we're going to connect with people like Rita Wood, maybe Dave Smith. We'll connect with the school board, and we're going to see what help that youth has. How's their family support? Do they have a positive peer group? Pro-social activities? These are all things that we're going to look at, and we're going to try and engage that youth with and get the family involved with as well. So we're always going to continue to work with community partners to support youth and to work with families. I'll be out in the lobby afterwards. If you guys have any specific questions for me, the role of the SRO in schools, and any questions relating to this, I'll be happy to answer them out in the lobby. Thank you very much.
Hi there, it's me again. Elizabeth and I are going to talk to you a little bit about educating and supporting students through this issue, and talk to you a little bit about what our role is in the schools and how we support students. So essentially, in schools, our focus really is around raising awareness and providing information to students, and of course to their families, as well as making sure that we provide good, valid, evidence-based information to our staff on issues related to cannabis use, and more specifically, how our educators can identify student mental health and addiction issues, and then how to intervene effectively, knowing who to contact should they have a concern. In schools, we also work to support and make referrals for intervention for any students that might need that kind of help. This work is not done in isolation. You've already heard Paul and Christine talk about the community partners, and we're very grateful here in Ottawa to be able to work with our community partners to really provide a wide continuum, a broad continuum of services and supports to our students, from preventing or delaying cannabis use among students to providing making referrals for intervention and treatment when that is needed. So for example, some of the things we're doing tonight would be an example. So information session for parents. We offer professional development sessions for our staff, either through our staff at the OCDSB or the Catholic Board, sometimes in conjunction with our colleagues from Ottawa Public Health. We also focus on prevention and helping students make healthy decisions, and that's done typically through the curriculum. But we also try to use a peer-to-peer approach because, let's face it, students talk to each other, and sometimes students talk to each other more than they speak to the adults in their lives. And we want to ensure that students have the most accurate, the most evidence-based information available, so that when they are chatting with their peers and giving their peers advice, they've got good information to share and pass on. So information about cannabis and other illicit drugs, as well as links to mental health, are taught through the curriculum, and specifically through the Ontario Health and Phys Ed curriculum. You may be aware that the Ontario Health and Phys Ed curriculum was updated in 2015, so it's fairly recent, and the update was fairly significant. From a mental health perspective, there's been much more of an emphasis on making healthy choices, talking about healthy living, and really looking at helping students develop the knowledge and the skills to make good, healthy decisions so that they can lead good, healthy lives. When we think about that from the substance use perspective, when we talk to students about substance use, we really focus in on physical and mental health. So we talk about how cannabis affects the brain in the same way that you've heard about tonight. We talk to them about how their brains continue to develop until they're 25, and that Significant frequent cannabis use can affect their brains, and it can lead to significant problems with memory and concentration, problems with their thinking and their reasoning ability, as well as managing their emotions and making decisions. From a mental health perspective, you've already heard a little bit about the impact that cannabis can have on some individuals. It can increase anxiety, it can bring on depression, and in rare cases, it can result in delusional and psychotic symptoms. There's also a large focus on making healthy choices. We understand that our children are going to be impacted by media, by their peers, other influences. So what we really want them to be able to do is to think things through and make good, healthy choices. So in health classes, they do talk about the influence of substance use. Should they use it or not? So they talk about things like personal values and how do your own personal values impact decisions that you make around use or non-use. Remember the first slide that you saw talked about 13% of students would use cannabis when it becomes legal. That means that 87% are saying they probably wouldn't use cannabis when it becomes legal. That's an important statistic. We also talk about the impact of peer pressure and, of course, media influences. Curiosity, of course, is also an issue. What would it be like? What will it feel like? There's also, of course, talk about legal restrictions that you've heard about, as well as cultural teachings and the importance of that. And then the impact on others, so really looking at it from a social perspective, the effect of secondhand smoke on others. The learning about cannabis starts early. It starts in grade 6 in our schools, but students learning about substance use in general is part of a continuum that starts in grade 1 and extends all the way through to grade 12. Another area of information for students is through the 4th R curriculum. And that's a classroom-based curriculum. The 3 R's, of course, are reading, writing, and arithmetic. And the 4th R refers to relationships. And that particular curriculum has been revised recently, and it now includes a wide range of ages and formats and special populations. And it's dedicated not only to promoting healthy adolescent relationships, but also reducing risky behaviors. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Elizabeth to talk about other professional development.
Good evening. So Petra has highlighted for you so far a lot of the curriculum links that our education staff have access to when they're teaching our students about these important skills. What I want to highlight for you now are some resources that we have that teachers can access to make sure that they're up to date on all the information and that they're using the most evidence-based practices and materials to teach our students. So the first one, they're supporting minds. So that's a document that was produced in 2013 by the Ministry of Education for educators. And there's one whole chapter on substance abuse, but it covers approximately about 8 different mental health issues that teachers might encounter in their classrooms. So in terms of substance abuse, it certainly has a lot of evidence-based information. It'll inform teachers about what are some of the warning signs that they could be looking for in the students in their classrooms, how to create a supportive classroom environment. So we're always trying to do that prevention work. So if they have these welcoming, supportive classrooms that students are feeling comfortable and confident in. And there's about 4 pages of additional resources that teachers can go look at if they need more information. There's also OFIA, which is a website resources for educators that provides them with a lot of lesson plans that they can link back to the curriculum. So the curriculum gives them content of what they need to cover with the students at the different ages and grade levels, but OFIA website gives them how to go about it. It may give them activities to do with their students, links to videos that they might want to show that have all been reviewed, vetted, and are most current information for teachers to access. In addition to that, as a school board, we're always being responsive to the needs of our education staff. So if we hear that they need more information, that's where we'll start to work with community partners like Public Health and Rita Wood to provide learning sessions for teachers on the most current information. So it was already mentioned by Public Health, for example, that they have presentations for staff that they can go in and bring them up to date on current information around cannabis. So that's constantly changing, whether it be about cannabis or other topics. So we're always being responsive to the needs of our staff around that. As a school board, we have a wide variety of a range, a continuum of supports that students can access. So as always, you kind of start with the most general. So in school, students can easily access a guidance counselor, a student success teacher, who can be a first step for them if they're struggling, they're having questions, unsure about certain behaviors, peer relation difficulties. So there's always access to that type of support staff. We're very fortunate in Ottawa, in both school boards, that our students can have access to social work or psychological support. So you may not be aware, but every school in both of our boards has access to those professional mental health services that students are able to access, and also that our staff can access. So if the staff is wondering about a student, noticing some changes in behavior, some concerns, they can consult with those professional staff to see, is this really something I should be worried about, or what should I do? And then also, very fortunate within our city to have Rita Wood and Addiction Family Services, who have school-based counselors in all of our schools. So you've already heard many times tonight, I talked about the various partnerships that we have in our city and how we're very fortunate to have those partnerships. So as the ending, I just wanted to highlight for you one of our strong partnerships and community collaboration is with Rita Wood Addiction and Family Services. So as I mentioned earlier, you may or may not know, all high schools within Ottawa and both boards have access to school-based counselors. The frequency of their visits may depend on the school, but every school has an addiction counselor in their high school that students can access. All of these counselors have received additional training in terms of possible implications around the cannabis and legalization of cannabis. And they already have created a number of prevention sessions and education workshops that are tailored to this current reality about cannabis, and they can offer those sessions at the school's request to students and or staff. They've also been responsive in terms of increasing some of their parent programs, and they are certainly out front as well, so you can approach them if that's something you're interested in. But for example, a program of theirs, ARC, so where they will help parents increase their awareness, how to respond, how to cope, and to increase your knowledge. And they certainly work in collaboration with Ottawa Public Health, Ottawa Police Services, and both of ours school boards to make sure, one thing that's really important is that we're giving consistent messaging and strategies and supports to our students. So as a city, we're very fortunate to have that strong, cohesive approach on this topic and other topics as well. So thank you.
All right, good evening, folks. My name is Marino. I'm the manager for School and Community Mental Health and Wellness at Ottawa Public Health. And I want to thank you all for coming out tonight for this important info session. I also want to thank our presenters, Christina and Christina, our public health nurses, Paul from Ottawa Public Police Services, and our two school board folks, Petra and Elizabeth.